With the 2023 Triennial Property Value update happening here in Ashtabula County this year for next year's tax bills, one of the questions that we're getting a lot of comments on and topics being presented is on CAUV. Remember, that's the current agricultural use valuation, or the large tax credit and decrease that farmers receive on their property. Now, this value gets updated as well every 3 years, just like all residential property values do too. And CAUV is based on the soils that are beneath a farmer's property, and the state will assign a value to each different type of soil that is significantly lower than what the market value would be for that same property. Now, one of the things happening this year with CAUV, though, is that there's a large increase, larger than what we're seeing in the residential market, increase in the values for the soil types for CAUV versus the residential. So from 2020 to 2023, on average, about 75% of our acres here in Ashtabula County are increasing by about 300% on the CAUV value. So most of them are moving from, let's say, about $300 an acre to about $900 an acre. That's still significantly lower than the market value for farmland, but that's a very steep increase over the 3-year period in comparison to what we're seeing with the residential market, where it's right around 32%. And so many folks ask, well, why is it so much higher than the residential market? And that is due to a number of factors. The state actually determines the values for CAUV. Like I said, it's a state formula. Sometimes it works just as good as that one side of the market, but it's a state formula that they determine and use the inputs for. It's not a county formula, not a county-driven process. And so the state will use several different factors for the formula, and this all combines to essentially determine the soil values for all the different types of soils here in Ohio. There's over about 500 different soil types. In Ashtabula County alone, we have 69 different soil types that the state will actually assign a value to. And so with that formula, it's a pretty complicated formula. We're gonna have that webinar, remember, on Thursday. But the thing to kind of think about and remember is that the state is trying to mimic the average farm in Ohio and what the profitability and the financials are for the average farm. So they take into account a number of different factors, including the cropping pattern for average farms here in Ohio, the crop prices, what changes in crop prices for not all different crops or not all different types of agriculture here in Ohio, but wheat, corn, and soybeans. Crop yields, so how fruitful are the fields in Ohio, the average fields. Non-land production costs, so how expensive is the average farm in Ohio. And then a capitalization rate, or the interest rate that is kind of an average across the state, that also helps in terms of the profitability aspect, or how much it may cost to actually loan. And so the state will then combine all of these different inputs into the formula. And essentially the idea is they first get the gross operating income, which is the crop yield times the average crop price, so what gross the average farm takes in terms of income. Then they determine the net operating income by decreasing the crop price, crop yield by the non-land production costs. So essentially, what are the costs for the average farm? And then they divide that by the capitalization rate, so the cost for borrowing, the interest rate. And that has fluctuated over the years, but perfect economic storms have caused spikes. So the last spike was in 2014, and what the state did was they changed a little bit the capitalization rate. They changed some of the yields and the prices in terms of how long they look at things. And it's been 10 years, but there's been another large spike. And so essentially that is one of the reasons, looking at this formula, and we'll go a little bit more in depth during our webinar, and the State Department of Taxation has a lot of information on their website. Unfortunately, there is no way to appeal what your formula or what your value type is for farmland. So you can appeal your property value for your home, your residence, for your business, but you cannot appeal your CEV value. So what people can do though is you can be knowledgeable, you can know ahead of time essentially the changes, and we have that information on our website so you can see where your values are moving. We don't have tax rates, we can't tell you what your taxes will be, and it's very, very important to remember that value increases do not equal tax increases, dollar for dollar. So there are reduction factors, there are many mitigating factors to help to lower the tax increase from what the percent value increase is. So never hesitate to reach out, ask us questions on the formula, on the process, for example. Ultimately, CEV is still a huge, huge tax savings. It's still a big, important thing that we encourage farmers to be on because your savings is still ginormous. Unfortunately, there's just a large increase in the value this year versus the residential aspect, but it's still going to be much lower in terms of the value than what the market rate will be.